today, as well as have a little museum if you want to go and look. And we have a fantastic collection of archaeological material, archives, all connected with the work that we've done and other people have done in the Levant for the last 150 or so years. So once lockdown is over, you're very welcome to come and visit us. Now today we're hearing from the Eastern Bedia Pools Archaeological Project, and we're hearing from 4 of the contributors to that project. First of all, we're going to have York Rowan, who is Research Associate Professor at the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago. And he is going to be followed up by Matt. Excuse me, I've got to get your first name. Where have you gone? I can't find the screen. All of a sudden seems to have disappeared. Who is at the University of Nottingham, Professor Matt Jones. And then we have Gary Rollefson, who is Professor Emeritus at Whitman College. And last of all, we have Alexander Voss, who is a doctor somewhere or another, and I'm really sorry I haven't got his details in front of me. So without further ado, can I hand over now to York Rowan, who is kicking things off.
Thanks very much, Felicity, and thank you, Carol. And also I wanted to thank Maggie at CBRL, I believe, who set a lot of this up and is making sure that things run smoothly and stick to time perhaps too. As mentioned, my name is York Rowan. I'm at the University of Chicago. I'm one of the co-directors of the Eastern Body Archaeological Project, which is sponsored by the University of Chicago with greatly appreciated funding from the Palestine Exploration Fund, the Brennan Foundation, Whitman College, DePaul University, the 7 Pillars of Wisdom Trust, and private donors to a fundraising effort on experiment.com. This project would not have been possible without the logistical and collegial support of the Department of Antiquities of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. And so I want to emphasize that we really appreciate this. In addition, we received essential logistical support from the Royal Body of Forces of Jordan, the American Center of Oriental Research, German Protestant Institute of Archaeology in Amman, the University of Nottingham, Dartmouth College, and Yeditepe University, where Alex Wass is based. And we would like to emphasize our appreciation especially to the students and volunteers who have joined us to live and work in the challenging environment of the Black Desert that we're going to look at today. The Eastern Body Archaeological Project study area comprises an east-west transect across the part of the Black Desert, southern part of the Eastern Body, just north of the Jordanian border with Saudi Arabia. Our survey and excavations have concentrated on 2 areas, basalt pools and Wadi al-Katafi. And over the past 10 years, we have recognized a striking and surprising presence of late Neolithic communities that provide evidence for a great amount of time and energy that people invested into building sturdy structures of basalt. In each of these areas, in Katafi and basalt pools, our excavations indicate that these structures were used and reused by hunter-herders, although there are some differences between the 2 areas. So today, it's not possible to cover all of our results, and we can easily point those interested in publications about our research. We can point you to those very, very easily. Today, what we'd like to do is to highlight the environmental context for the people who occupied an area that seems so inhospitable to most of us now. What were the environmental conditions like during the late Neolithic period? The dramatic increase in population attested by these many structures that you'll see in a moment come from, they're too numerous for local indigenous population growth. If that's the case, where did these people come from? Did they immigrate from the Western, more fertile and arable lands? Did they arrive from other regions as well, from Mesopotamia to the east or from the north? This brings us to another major question we wish to address today. What evidence is there for people arriving in the region and for their contact with other areas? Now, these are just a few of the questions that our speakers hope to address today. Our first speaker, Dr. Matt Jones, is professor of quaternary science at the University of Nottingham, and he specializes in reconstructing past climate and environmental variability using physical and chemical sedimentary proxies. Matt works on projects in Jordan, Turkey, and Iran. So he's truly able to look at the macro and micro scales of environmental change. Our second speaker in the lineup is Dr. Gary Rollefson. He's Emeritus Professor of Anthropology from Whitman College. Gary specializes in prehistory and lithic assemblages, and he's directed excavations at the Neolithic megasite of Ain Ghazal, which is, just to mention, one of the sites for which he's well known. Our third speaker is Dr. Alexander Was, lecturer at Yeditepe University in Istanbul. Alex is also a prehistorian with a specialization in animal bones and experience at sites across the Eastern Mediterranean and North Africa. So after our speakers, we plan to have ample time, as Carol mentioned, for questions and answers. If you type your questions into the Q&A function of Zoom, Carol will field the questions to our group. And so without any further ado, I'd like to hand it off to our first speaker, Dr. Matt Jones. Matt?
Thanks, York. Hopefully you can all see me and on my screen. York's nodding, so I'll take that as an affirmative. So hello, and I just add my thanks particularly to the CBRL and the PEF for organising today's event. And thank you all for coming. So to start then, as York said, I'm a quaternary scientist, so my research interests are particularly in reconstructing water availability and how that changes through time, and in particular how it's changed through the Holocene, so the last 11,500 years or so. And so I wanted to start really with this image and thinking about water as a key, if not the key ingredient for producing a green, or at least a greener desert during the late Neolithic. And if you can see the image here, there's hints of green in the Wadi al-Katafi during one of the Eastern Ghadi Archaeological Project's field seasons in sort of late springtime, but maybe not enough to consider this a fully green desert as yet. So if we start then by trying to look at the region more broadly of Southwest Asia, and thinking about where that water might have come from, and using the present day as a context of where water tends to come from today. So you can ignore all the little dots and symbols on this map for now, and just maybe concentrate on these plots of the local sort of average weather conditions, both precipitation in the bars and temperature in these grey lines for different places across the broader region. And in general, we see this sort of classic pattern of wet winters and dry summers, unless you're far down here in the southeast, where that temporal pattern changes as we see more influence of summer rainfall associated with the Indian monsoon systems. The more standard winter rainfall tends to come from storm tracks coming through the Mediterranean from the North Atlantic and into the region. It's also probably worth noting at this point that there's also occasional rains from air masses that come across North Africa and pick up moisture in the Red Sea. So this is sort of the major timings of rainfall across the region, and you can see our study sites of focus today, symbolised by these two markers here in the middle of the map. If we look slightly more locally, then we can look at rainfall across Jordan itself. And really to note the strong rainfall gradient that exists across present-day Jordan. And you can see from the spatial sort of variability of this rainfall, this is really winter rainfall driven by those storm tracks coming in off the Mediterranean. And part of this rainfall pattern and this rainfall gradient is linked to the general topography as well of Jordan. So this strong gradient from quite high values over 500 millimeters a year into really arid conditions of less than 50 millimeters of rainfall a year for our area of interest today, within almost less than 100 kilometres, due to sort of really a rain out and rain shower effect from the high ground just to the east of the Dead Sea Basin down here. In terms of time, again, we see this sort of classic winter rainfall dominated, and this is data, average data for the period 1943 to 2005 from the town of Safawi, out in the eastern Bardia. And you can see the pattern, but you can also see maybe from the error bars that this is quite noisy data with a lot of variability. And if we look at that in a bit more detail, here's just a snapshot of 20 years of that record between 1943 and 1962. And you can see that, you know, some years are very dry and there's very little rainfall at all. Look at 1948, for example, and other years are particularly wet. And the timings of the really heavy rainfall, it's not always consistent either. So it might normally be in sort of the November to January period, but occasionally you might get a very wet March. And the timing and the amount of this rainfall is really important for how green that desert or the vegetation is allowed to grow in that particular part of the Bardia. So the predictability of the rainfall and its timing are really important in terms of how vegetation will respond to the arrival of that rainfall today at any present time. It's an important thing to keep in mind when we think about conditions in the past as well.